Okay, it's called to order the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for Wednesday, July 26th, 2023. May we have the roll call, please?
Marie Jones,
Present.
Bob Harris,
Present.
Dr. Ricardo Guthrie,
Presente.
Mary Norton,
Present.
Marshall Camp,
Present.
Ian Sharp, and Carol Mandino.
Okay, the next item is public comment. At this time, any member of the public may address the commission on any subject within their jurisdiction that's not scheduled today. Due to open meeting laws, the commission cannot discuss or act on items presented during this portion of the agenda. Is there anybody in the public who would like to make a comment on an item that is not on the agenda today? Nobody, it looks like. And now, can we have, we need to approve the minutes from the last meeting, which was Wednesday, June 21st. Can we have a motion for that?
I'll move to approve the minutes from June 14th, 2023.
Okay, thank you. And a second?
Second by Marshall Camp.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
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 All those opposed? Thank you. Next, we have the public hearing items. So we have, let's see, in the public hearing, we have a direct to ordinance zoning map amendment request from Vintage Partners and Live Communities, and we're being asked to continue this item to our March 9th meeting. So I need a motion to continue that item.
I'll move to continue the item for the direct ordinance to zoning map amendment from Vintage Partners and Live Communities.
And a second, please? I'll second that. Any discussion on that item? All right, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 All those opposed? So that item passes and is continued. The next, I don't know why this doesn't come under, this is just under general business, not public hearing, so I guess this is not a public hearing item. The annexation request? Is that true?
It was determined that an annexation request going to the Planning and Zoning Commission is actually not required to be a public hearing, that the public hearing occurs at council. So I was asked to put it under the general category. Is not how we've done it in the past.
Okay. So this is an annexation request from Vintage Partners and Live Communities again. And also, we're being asked to continue that item. And do we still need to have a motion and vote on that? Since it's okay, so can I have a motion to continue that item to the public hearing on August 9th?
I can move to continue the annexation request from Vintage Partners and Live Community to August 9th, 2023.
Thank you. And a second? I'll second that. And so is there any discussion on that motion? If not, then, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 All those opposed? And that motion passes. And our next item is an information item from Sarah.
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me okay? And just in a moment, see the screen all right online?
Yes.
Great. Good afternoon, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. My name is Sarah Dector. I'm the Comprehensive and Neighborhood Planning Manager for the City of Flagstaff. I'm the project lead on the Flagstaff Regional Plan update, and we're giving an update to all the boards and commissions this summer, and so this is our visit with you. This commission, I know, is paying special attention to the regional plan update, and so you're very familiar with the different phases. We are currently in the final phases this fall of phase 2, the last few steps of pulling together material and information that will ultimately become the written plan. And the key part of that we're working on right now is scenario planning. And we'll talk a little bit about that today and what's next for that process. We are also preparing for phase 3 plan creation with the formation of a regional plan advisory committee that is being appointed by city and county manager. And then, of course, the final step, as you know, in plan adoption is multifaceted because we do this project jointly with the city and the county, and will include both a ballot initiative for city residents and a county adoption through the Board of Supervisors. So we are going to give an update on what we've done first since we last had an update with the commission. I know some of the commission members have attended other public meetings and seen some of these updates, so please stop me if there are questions. The whole presentation takes about 20 minutes, and so I'm happy to pause and answer questions on the slides as we move forward. So in the fall of 2022, we had 11 workshops at diverse locations and times throughout the community. At that workshop series, we had about 150 plus in-person participants and a visioning survey that received about 126 public responses. That material has been pulled together by staff and used to understand overall vision and values issues that the community wants answered. One of the things generated from that process is a list of key focal questions that the community wants to understand when we actually produce a draft plan. How was this topic addressed in the way that we phased those questions? So that material is going to be carried forward all the way through to the draft plan. And much of that engagement focused on the natural environment, open spaces and sustainability, equity and inclusion in the process and in the plan in general, multimodal transportation, housing, affordable housing and housing options, historic heritage preservation and the character of the community, and overall the accountability that the plan means for both the city of Flagstaff and Coconino County. Chair Jones, I think a hand went up online.
Yes, this is Commissioner Guthrie. Sarah, this is good. I had spoken with Jordan and saying that at least the number 7 of what we heard was that these planning meetings, even the games, created a type of robust discussion and dialogue, and that itself is an accomplishment that is equal to some of the scenarios. Because one of the scenarios would be that the Regional Planning Institute this type of engagement and sharing of ideas. Whether or not people agree or disagree really wasn't the point as far as I was concerned. It was that you had people talking across the table who never really engaged with each other in a consistent way. And I thought that that is at least the number 7 of what I heard, that you had people young and old, near and far, actually trying to struggle for a language that they could agree on. And again, the language itself seems to get in the way of really grasping what a regional plan should look like. And I want to give credit where credit is due. Your team was excellent in terms of ensuring that open and honest discussion took place. No fistfights broke out, but there were a couple people who said, I'm not going to do this ever again. But by the end of the exercise, they're like, okay, I can see the benefit of this type of process. So again, kudos to you and your staff who really stayed in there and didn't say, well, if you refuse to play, we're going to do what we're going to do anyway. And nobody said that. They said you have to consider how this is a model for how we build community. So if you think about that, that might be a useful piece. Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Guthrie.
I can't necessarily see when hands go up, so please just holler out. We're a small group.
Yeah, I just saw it on the top of the screen. It like caught my attention for a second. So, and so what Commissioner Guthrie is talking about is where we've landed with scenario modeling work. We have, we listened to that first round and said there's this appetite for very genuine conversation, but also conversation that allows it to be simple enough and not lost in the complexity of what the regional plan and the zoning code and the other planning tools we use are, so people can actually shape decisions in a way that's very meaningful. And so scenario modeling is some of the core of that work. The software, I want to just discuss the software we're using. There's about 3 or 4 platforms that support this kind of sketch exploratory scenario planning. The one we've chosen is Urban Footprint, which is fairly well calibrated to Western cities in the United States. And we also have the opportunity to calibrate a lot of it to Flagstaff in particularly. It's not an unlimited calibration, but that's part of why we have a technical advisory group that's looking at a lot of this with staff. And we had a staff meeting in May, end of May, I think it was, where we actually went through all the back end things we can touch and move around in this model, and sort of talked about what the calibrations would look like moving forward. So right now in this scenario planning portion, which is part of phase 2, we are kind of moving into the phase where next week we have our 5th technical advisory group meeting, and then we will get started actually modeling these scenarios, which is the next step of actually letting that software run the things we are working towards through the model and hopefully start to see and understand what the trade-offs could be. So our technical advisory group is made of members of the community who have expertise either in the social fabric of the community, a topic specific to the regional plan, or an overall development in a number of different ways. So development professionals in the tag include David Hayward, who's the former chair of the Heritage Preservation Commission, and a developer and home builder in the community. Paul Moore, who's an architect, David Carpenter, who is also a builder in the community, and Stephanie Bauer from NAU, who is one of their master planner. And so they are meeting with I should have mentioned that Tim Dott is also finance in real estate finance at 1AZ Bank. So we have different people with different development professional expertise, but also several people who specialize in affordable housing, either by being members of the Housing Commission or running Northern Arizona Housing Solutions, as well as academics and other engineering professionals like Julie Lead in our community. So all of these kind of fit together, and they are working through side by side with staff of here's where we are in the process of taking public comment from our workshops and turning it into something that we can put into these models and understand impacts from the kinds of choices we have before us as a community. So the first input into that process is the outcomes from the public workshops, which we had 13 workshops. We created over 60 maps through the gameplay and the gamification at these workshops. We had over 285 participants, probably closer to 300 because there was a meeting we didn't take attendance at. We just did a head count. And then we've included 10 community-based organizations that are receiving assistance, are providing assistance to the process in reaching hard populations that are normally not represented in land use planning. So that resulted in a map that kind of is a heat map of where everyone put different types of chips, which could have been job chips or commercial or industrial uses, and also a lengthy set of discussion notes that we've calculated in a spreadsheet. So we could really understand how people with different scenarios before them, like we have lots of infrastructure funding or very little infrastructure funding, for example, we're making choices differently when faced with the gameplay at the workshops in March. What we heard, some of the takeaways that we had not heard as clearly before that we heard through these workshops was there generally is still quite a lot of support for mixed-use development in the community. People wanted to put commercial uses closer to where they lived and say this commercial center should be more robust and serve my community better. But they also had mixed feelings about density and where it could be located to support those neighborhood centers. Another piece is that there was a strong support for more transit and for new road connections in the community. So part of the game that people played at this workshop was they got budget tokens. And if you spent so many on a road system, you could draw so many miles of road. And if you spent it on a transit system, then you could build new transit lines. And though there was some differences in which kind of pressures led people to put more transit down or more roads, there was kind of an even split of people who wanted to heavily invest in transit and people who heavily wanted to invest in road infrastructure. And so that's an interesting combination of things to learn. And the last thing was there's very broad interest in pretty specific areas for forest and open space protection as a resource for Flagstaff and the community at large. So from these workshops, from the online survey we did in June where we asked for people for input on policy priorities, we then are working towards creating growth ideas. And we'll go over what the 6 growth ideas that are being kind of combined at the next technical advisory group meeting are in just a moment. But those growth ideas are really standalone things that will then be combined into scenarios. So for instance, one thing I can say is that one of the growth ideas is protecting natural resources. And instead of having that be like one focus of one scenario, it's something that's going to be clearly incorporated into all the scenarios. And another thing we've done with the scenario planning is instead of starting like we did last time we did scenario planning where we said, here's Flagstaff today, and we'll plan scenarios out into the future, we've actually kind of built what we call a default or a business as usual scenario, which says, what if the past trends and our current policies just continue into the future without change? And that will actually be the scenario we use as the basis for comparison for other scenarios. And one thing I can tell you, it is not a very optimistic scenario. We see in the business as usual scenario that we hit the tipping point where more than 50% of our workforce lives outside of the region, which includes Belmont, Doney Park, Kachina Village, Fort Valley. People are living in Williams, Winslow, and Camp Verde to work in Flagstaff. So much longer commuting times are the result of our business as usual. We also see that affordability is not achieved, and it is probably, it is significantly worse to be able to, in terms of making sure it's affordable for our median income. And so we really do start to see some of the problems that we have today. We don't do a lot that addresses them, and they get exacerbated by us not making changes into how we have been doing things. And some of that is tied to our land availability and that's why the land availability and suitability study that our planning director, Michelle McNulty, is doing is going to be so important to this process. But it is also because the pattern of development doesn't leave us with land availability that encourages affordability. So we see a lot of that in the business as usual. When we get to scenario choosing, we'll provide a much more complete analysis of that for the public. And if you're interested, the TAG meeting on Tuesday, which will then be posted online, will also have more details on that. So our summer outreach has looked not only like us going to the 20-plus boards and commissions that the city and county have, but it included a public survey, 2 tag meetings, a webinar, an open house at City Hall. It also included a meeting with the Sunnyside neighborhood. And then ultimately, we'll kind of go quiet for a month or two while we build the scenarios into the computer model and come out later in the fall with a scenario choosing set of workshops and activities. At the same time that we're working on the computer model, we'll be moving forward into phase 3 by creating our regional plan committee and convening them for the first time. Their first activity as a committee will be, of course, to set up their rules and procedures. They're not going to be a board or commission or a subcommittee of a commission, and so they will need to decide what portions of the board and commission's manual they want to apply, how they want to run their meetings. But after that, they will be convened in time to participate in scenario choosing and offer a recommendation to planning and zoning and the city council on which scenario they think is the one that should ultimately be the basis for writing the new regional plan. So this committee is going to be appointed by the city and county manager. The process for committee appointment is that the Board of Supervisors and the city council each provided 3 to 4 nominations to staff. Staff followed up with those individuals and asked if they wanted to participate, and if they did, if they would provide a letter of intent that explained who they were and why they wanted to be on the committee. We've received all of those. There were about 34 nominations, and we've prepared a staff report that we will shortly be routing to Steve Peru, the county manager, and Greg Clifton, our city manager, for their review and ultimately appointment. The group, since it is not a board and commission, will have 20-plus members, but have a much lower, they won't actually have to meet quorum. So we won't have the problem we had with the last regional plan update, where we were canceling 2 out of every 3 meetings for lack of quorum because the group was so large and getting enough people there at every single meeting turned out to not be very realistic. We'll still really want to have robust participation. It's not been an issue with our TAG. Our technical advisory group has been about 22 people, and we have never had a meeting with fewer than 18 people, which is good news and shows the investment people have in these processes. The commitment to this committee is that they will meet for approximately a year, no more than once or twice a month. And so I think that also helps us keep up participation because we know it's a timed commitment. So, as I said, they are going to start by setting the stage. They're a little different than a standing commission because they are going to have to go over how they want to conduct the work of themselves as the committee. But it also will give them some opportunity to consider procedures for meetings that would not be possible for a commission like the Planning and Zoning Commission. So, for instance, they could run a workshop with city staff, and that would not be an issue. They could run listening sessions, not be an issue. So we can hopefully come up with their plan on how they would like to be working through the material. Once they develop a framework with the city staff on how the plan's going to be organized and what the organizing principles are going to be, they will move into a process where they review chapters. And so staff will write and present draft chapters to the committee. The committee will provide comments, and we'll have a conflict resolution process, both internal and with the committee, to help deal with conflicting comments, which are inevitable in a plan that covers as much territory as the regional plan does. And so that is my brief update on where we are and what lies before us in the regional plan. Before we jump to the next questions, I would like to go over the growth ideas, which I didn't include in your packet. But the growth ideas that came out of the workshops are basically 6 ideas. The first one is investing in rural activity centers, which are basically locations that serve the larger surrounding region of northern Arizona, such as Silver Saddle and 89, the Kachina Village Mountain Air activity centers and commercial areas, We saw a lot of feedback that this was desirable both from a regional jobs perspective for some people and for serving the tribal community, the Native nations that surround Flagstaff. There is some infrastructure feasibility issues with this as a concept, and so we're working through what those mean with the county. Another idea that is moving forward as a growth idea and will get incorporated into scenarios is urbanizing or providing density within our greenfield sites, John Wesley Powell, Woody Mountain Road area. All of those areas are subject to future development as the infrastructure is being provided in those areas. And so what could those look like and how could they be developed in a way that serves the community in the future? The fourth idea is to focus on downtown and NAU, primarily the areas along Milton and Lone Tree and downtown and the surrounding neighborhoods, and really plan to increase the use of those areas and the residential units within them. There is a fifth idea of focusing on East Flagstaff and providing opportunities for commercial redevelopment and mixed-use housing in East Flagstaff. And then the last idea is the conservation of natural resources and avoiding hazards like post-fire flooding with new development. So those are the big things that came out of the workshops as well. And I'd be happy to send you what these posters looked like. They were provided at the open house in the beginning of July. Any questions?
I don't see any hands yet, but I have a question, Sarah. Just kind of a detail. When you talk about available land, how did you characterize that when you were, I mean, are you talking about vacant land? How did you factor in, for instance, redevelopment of particular areas and things like that? How did you look at that? I was just curious about your kind of methodology for establishing what constituted available land.
Yeah, the business as usual scenario looked at, it probably had about an 80% lean towards available land, the vacant land primarily, or land that was very underutilized, or maybe like a vacant gas station, or places where there really was a vacant business. It looked at places like that primarily, and then included about maybe 20% of like actual like replacement redevelopment style infill. And that's kind of on par with the percentage by land area that we've seen in the last 10 years. So they were trying to kind of recreate that pattern without varying too much. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But that's sort of, you're still looking at basically something that falls into a category of underutilized or completely available, as opposed to something being completely redeveloped.
Right. In the business
Because
as
you
usual,
can't-
there were a few that look like that show something being redeveloped, but there are things that are very small in comparison to their overall zoning, or vacant land was sort of looked at first.
Okay, because I would have imagined that would show up a lot in terms of, for instance, 4th Street area, a lot of underutilized. Okay, well, in my opinion.
Well, and it didn't show any like big shifts in areas like that. We kind of tried in business as usual to spread it out, but I will say that the consulting team did try and see if concentrating that redevelopment, they weren't trying to over concentrating it, but like if they did a little here and a little there, or if they switched out the areas they were working in and putting into the model as business as usual kind of turnover on properties or creation of new uses on properties, if that made a huge difference. And it kind of didn't. If we stick within what the existing zoning allows, we didn't see that there was a lot of movement if like one area of town was developing more rapidly than another.
Okay, interesting, yeah. Mary?
Couple questions. On the tag meetings, are those available to watch live, or are they just recorded for viewing later? And what will the regional plan committee meetings be like? Do we just see their results in the end as a compilation, or is that something that we could follow along or watch recordings of?
The tag meetings are recorded on Teams. They're not streamed. And then they are, actually, they're recorded on Zoom, and then we do try and post them online within 48 hours. They also always come with a form that allows people to give feedback from that tag meeting, and then we share that at the next tag meeting with the group and say, look, here's the kind of public comments we got about the last meeting that you had. I don't know all the details yet with the regional plan committee. Staff is definitely going to recommend those meetings be streamed. We need to work out the logistics of how to stream a meeting if 20 people want to attend in person. We do that sometimes at the Aquaplex, but the sound isn't always that great. I think you guys will experience that this year. If the room gets really crowded, it can be difficult. So when that group meets for the first time, hopefully we will stream that meeting. It will definitely be open to the public and advertised so people can attend. But I don't have all those logistics work out. I need to talk to clerk in the IT department and see what solutions we can come up with. There's also not a budget that would allow us to like rent the Aquaplex every 2 weeks for this at this time. So there's going to be some discussion about that, but I don't know all the details yet.
And then my other question is, like on the default scenario and the business as usual, and you mentioned that, that might lead to 50% of the workforce out of area. How does that differ when compared to the growth ideas that would encourage, rural activity centers and development out in East Flagstaff and Kachina and Belmont? Is that not somewhat of a fine line, almost the same?
Not necessarily within what we are doing, because we really consider the region the larger metro plan area. So if someone were building homes or increasing density in a place like Fort Valley, that would still be considered in-region commuting. So it's commuting of less than 20 miles or so from the city. Where moving to Winslow or Williams or Parks is out of region commuting, and that's where that line for the over 50% is drawn.
Okay, so it's just a further distance. I didn't catch what you were considering out of area, how far out. Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
And it is that's like the areas that really have commuting data that shows they've always kind of been in commuting communities, where commuting from Williams to Flagstaff and vice versa, 10 years ago, lots of people who worked in Williams lived in Flagstaff, or people who worked in Sedona lived in Flagstaff. As our cost of living is going up, the 2020 census is showing that some of that is starting to flip, or at least trend a different way because of cost of living. So that's just another measure. But I can't tell you what investing in rural activity centers or the downtown will necessarily mean for that statistic, but we will generate them through the scenario modeling.
Any other commissioners who have questions or comments? Well, thank you very much, Sarah.
Welcome.
Really appreciate the presentation. It was very clear. That ends our items on here, except for anything miscellaneous that commission members might have to present or staff might have to present to the commission. So jump in if you have something. Okay. Well then, we're adjourned. Thank you so much.